Genesis, the 28th chapter, verses 10 through the beginning of chapter 19. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed there that there was a ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven. And the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he put under his head, and he set it up for a pillar, and poured oil out on top of it. He called the place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at the first. And let's turn to the bulletin and sorry, not bulletin. I was going to look on the back for that song. Let's look at page 572. And let's read in response from selection 49. O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou searchest out my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways.
For there is not a word in my tongue, but lo, O Lord, thou knowest it altogether.
Thou hast beset me behind and before, and laid thine hand upon me.
Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain unto it.
Whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence?
If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there.
If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea,
even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me.
if I say, Surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me shall be night.
Even the darkness hideth not from thee, but the night shineth as the day.
The darkness and the light are both alike to thee.
How precious also are thy thoughts unto me, O God. How great is the sum of them.
If I should count them, they're more in number than the sand.
When I awake, I am still with thee.
Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts.
And see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting.
The epistle lesson is from the letter to the Romans, the 8th chapter, verses 12 through 25. So then, brothers and sisters, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you've received a spirit of adoption. When we cry, Abba, Father, it is that very Spirit bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if in fact we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we are saved. Now, hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait with patience for it. And from the Gospel according to Matthew, from the 13th chapter, verses 24 through 30 and 36 through 43. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field, but while everybody was asleep, the enemy came and sowed weeds among his wheat, and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? He answered, An enemy has done this. And the slaves said to him, Then do you want us to go and gather them? But he replied, No, for in gathering the weeds you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest, and at harvest time I will tell the reapers, Collect the weeds first, and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. Then Jesus left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples approached him, saying, Explain to us this parable of the weeds of the field. He answered, The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen. I always get a kick out of folks who say, if you preach from the lectionary, you can't be topical, you can't be timely. And it seems to me to be just the opposite. If you stick with the lectionary, because it deals with eternal truths, you'll never be out of step with what's going on currently, because it's part of the human condition, and the scriptures deal very, very specifically and well with our human condition. One of the things that I also really like to point out is the tagline with which Jesus finishes his sermon to these people. He says, Look, here's this parable. Let me tell you how it is. It's about these ears of wheat. And it's like ears of corn. We call corn, and other people call it maize because language. Well, he's talking about ears of wheat, grain, heads of grain, and finishes the story with, if you have ears, then listen. It's a play on words. And I think that's a pretty marvelous thing that shows us that the very Son of God would have a sense of humor to say to us, okay, I'm going to tell you about ears of corn. Now, we discussed the corn and the weeds in the field and the whole thing. If you've got ears, then listen. He explains it pretty clearly. Life isn't always going to be harmonious and wonderful, because there are children both of darkness and of light. There are children of evil as well as children of good. I've mentioned before, I know, we have my favorite portion of the entire set of scriptures, old and new, all the books, all 66 books of the Bible. I think that the high point comes where John tells us in his first letter, let us love one another, because everyone who loves is a child of God and knows God. And then he says, but the unloving know nothing of God. Now, you've got God's children in all who love, all who are kindly towards one another, all who are loving, who are good toward one another, all of that, nurturing, caring, all of that goodness. Those are the children of God. Not hard to figure. But sometimes you'll hear people say in tumultuous days like we're living through, Well, we have to remember that we're all children of God. No. I don't think so. And I know that's not going to be a popular thing in some places, but the Bible tells us differently. It says there'll be children of evil as well as children of good. Who put the weeds in the field of wheat? He says the devil sows those seeds. Those are not the children of God. Now, the really tricky part is, some people take that concept and run with it with a big clout in their hand, and they want to just destroy. That's not it either, because the children of God wouldn't do that. So what we're stuck with is, we've got children of God and children of evil, but we've got to treat the children of evil in a way that, and this is the incredible part to me, they can be converted. We don't have to have children of God and children of evil. If the children of God really do their part and do it exactly right, the children of evil begin to change. Only God can do this. You and I can't. But we can do the work that's necessary for God's power and spirit to work to make things better, even in the hearts of those that would wish everyone else ill. One of the problems with, unfortunately, the children of evil is that they're very smart. They're very clever as to the ways of the world. And so right now we've got among the most outspoken and possibly damaging groups in the country is Black Lives Matter. How can you disagree with the words? It's a brilliant name for a movement. But the people who are running the thing, many of whom are not black, are Marxists. If you read from their website what they want to do, one of the things is break up the nuclear family. How is that a good thing? Jesus himself had at least a stepfather and a mom. We know from all the statistics, and talk to any social worker, anybody who's ever done work in that field, and you know that solid families with two parents, have a much better go of it. The kids do better. Everything about it's better. So when you have a Marxist group that's bent on destroying what America has always meant, and they're brilliant enough to call it Black Lives Matter, and then to add to it by saying, if you say, well, so do white lives, that makes you a racist. And how do you answer that? Because calling racist is the new form of yelling witch. In the 1600s, people died at the stake or were hanged, or in a manner of death I had never heard before. I was in the play The Crucible by a character named Giles Corey. And Giles was kind of a crotchety old man. And as I get older, I keep thinking, Giles Corey, I can play that better now than I ever used to. Giles Corey was pressed to death. In those days in Salem, one of the death methods was they put a barn door on top of you and pile rocks on it until you squashed. Rotten way to go. And old Giles' last words, as they were piling rocks on him and saying, "You confess to being a witch yet?" he grumbled out from under the boards, "More weight." That's a tough old geezer. At any rate, instead of yelling witch at somebody now, we yell racist. And you're in a trap. You're in a trap. Because logically it doesn't really work that if you say all lives matter, you're a racist. Any more than, let's say there are a dozen flowers in New York State that are on the verge of extinction. I don't know what the number might really be. Let's just say it's 12. If we single one out and say that only that one can be written about and talked about and sung about, you can't talk about the others, because if you already hate that one flower, that's not really right. That one flower and the other 11 are all part, they're a subset of a larger set called endangered species flowers, which is a smaller part of a subset that's bigger yet, that's endangered species flora and fauna. So if we say all those that are endangered need our nurturing and care, we've got the whole big group, which means we include all the flowers, which means we include those dozen in New York State, which means we include that one that's part of the 12. Logically, that's a fact. That's how that works. So if I say anything about any other group and include all groups, for instance, it can't possibly make me a racist. However, we live in times where you can't talk like that out in polite society, and I'm sure that as my YouTube numbers have gone down further and further, I have my 15 minutes of fame about a month ago, apparently, but there are fewer and fewer watching these, and probably, on this one, it's probably a good thing because I won't get much hate mail. But that happens to people. Back a couple of years ago, the last time I visited Facebook, I wrote about fasting for the Christians in Syria who were being butchered by the ISIS forces. And I actually got a very negative letter from a former classmate who didn't understand, just didn't get it. That I was being anti-Muslim because I was only praying for the Christians and fasting for the Christians. Last week's lectionary was wonderful. Jesus said, look, John the Baptist came fasting, and people said, hey, he's got a demon, he's crazy. And then I come, and people say, oh, he eats with sinners and tax collectors. He's a drunkard in the blood. You can't win with critics. That's how it is. So don't let them make you afraid. One of the things that is so annoying about the whole COVID business is you can't get straight facts. We hear one thing one week and the opposite thing the next week, and back and forth, which, not saying it's orchestrated, okay? Not saying that. But I will tell you, if it were to be orchestrated, one of the techniques, and a very smart one, would be keep people off balance all the time. Tell them this and then tell them that. Tell them this and then that and this and that. And then, of course, Joseph Goebbels of the Hitler administration in Germany, who said, tell a big lie, make it a big one, and tell it often enough. And if it's big enough and told often enough, folks will believe it. So whenever you're trying to deceive people, be it about illness, be it about race, be it about whatever, there are techniques that people who are really, really, really crafty can employ. Don't let them warn you. One of the marks of the Christian is we shouldn't be afraid, because we have God with us, like Jacob at Bethel, house of God, Ed. And we don't need to be any less sure that God is with us than he was when he rose up in that place and said, surely this is the house of God. This is where God is. It's the gateway to heaven. We're not to be afraid because we have with us the one who does away with sin and death, Jesus Christ, who is in our midst, who's in our hearts. And fortunate people that we are, we've got a home church. We have a place where we have family, where we know that at any moment we can call someone, or nowadays email them or text them. We can get in touch, and that we have people who will actually care. And in a raucous, tough world, full of all kinds of cross currents and craziness, that's not a small claim. We have people who actually can care about one another. I know I've said before, but I love the fact that in church I can look right at you and say, I love you. I love you. I love you. That means something. I love you. I love you. I love you. I can do that, and it's perfectly legitimate, because you know that that comes from the heart of Christ coming into our hearts. And again, I caution people, do not try that at Walmart. Different thing entirely. We're given so much in Christ. We're given so much in the power of God to make our lives better, stronger, healthier. And that's an interesting footnote too. You know, one of the big things was, oh, you know, you can get your tattoo, you can get an abortion, you can go to the liquor store, you can do this, but don't go to church. You can't go to church. When we were all cordoned off and quarantined from that. And have you read any statistics? It's that old joke about, crickets. There's not a lot being said about people who've gotten together and stayed a little ways apart and worshiped together. It's a good thing to give thanks to God. Turns out now in summertime, traditionally, I know Esplin's always used to have out in the gazebo, we'd have a service to give thanks to the folks that were first responders. And it turns out, apparently, if you're gathering outdoors, the COVID really doesn't like to get outside much. It's kind of a hothouse flower. And so here we have God who makes the greatest of cathedrals out of trees and rock and mountains. And that tends to be the safest place to worship. God provides so much for us, so unstintingly, so fully, so joyously. Let us receive those gifts and not be afraid. Just like the angels always say, when they're going to give a message from God, it's the first words out of their mouths. Don't be afraid. Which I just thought of this past week probably has to do with the fact that if we understand God's message for us, we don't have to be afraid. See, I've always thought prior to that probably angels really look scary. Because they have to tell you don't be afraid. So they can't be puffy and fluffy and look like, greeting card angels. That's... So if you saw like a little baby-looking thing with wings, would you be afraid? You might go, what's that? Which probably wouldn't be afraid. But some huge ball of light that is just so bright you can't really look at it, and it wants to talk to you, that could be a little frightening. Don't be afraid. The first words out of the angel's mouth. So I figured God is bright enough to know that probably for most of us, we're going to be so upset with having an encounter with an angel that if we get much of the message, it better be a brief part. And so the first part, the first thing we hear is, don't be afraid. And if you go away with nothing more than that, the angels have spoken. It's a good thing. So, that's what I'm going to tell you. Don't be afraid. And if you go away with just that, good on you. To the glory of the Father, and the Son, and Holy Spirit, this day of all of us, as we walk forth from here out into a beautiful day of bright light, a little bit of extra heat, but a whole beautiful bunch of sunshine. To God be the glory. Amen.
Amen.